It's a funny thing to say, but she seemed bigger later. I don't mean, you know what I mean?
I think she got a little bigger later.
Did she?
Yes.
No, not through artificial means of any kind.
No.
But I mean, her entire face and structure seemed to be bigger later. Especially structure, I guess. Did you sense any terrible emotional problems in her at the time? Or is that a silly question?
There was a certain insecurity. She had with her, I remember, a coach on the set, a dramatic coach. And she used to go into a huddle with her between scenes. But at that time, I had no idea of what she was eventually in store for.
And that was what year, Asphalt Jungle?
I have no memory for dates, whatever.
I'm so glad to hear that. I have none either. Whenever I give an interview and they say, what year did you work for so-and-so or get out of school, I cannot tell. And people think it's affected.
Yes. It was about a year and a half after the war.
Yeah.
That's the way I remember things, only consecutively. And
when was the war? Quick. Clark Gable died not too long after the Misfits was made.
Right at the end.
And I think one of those old ladies who used to chastise Hollywood constantly thought that your film killed him. And I remember one of them made much of that. I don't know if it was Lolly or Hedda.
No, that would have been Hedda.
Hedda.
Yes.
Would it? Yeah. Do you remember that?
Yes,
clearly? I expect you do.
There was nothing whatever to it, of course. Yeah. Stuntmen did those scenes of violence with the horse.
The very ones they were talking about as the ones that killed?
Yes, that's right.
I guess that puts that story in its proper perspective. We have to take a station break. We'll be right back.
The Dick Cavett Show with special guest John Huston will continue following station identification.
Talking with John Huston, and we have one more film clip. And then one film of yours that, well, I have a friend who at last count has seen it 18 times, and I guess you may know which one I mean, because there's one that people see over and over and over, particularly college students. For years there has been a cultish following to Beat the Devil. And so there are people who can actually describe the plot of it, which is a nice trick.
Oh, I hear they even talk back to the screen.
Oh, yeah.
They know the dialogue.
They do
yes.
If you sit in there, you can hear a kind of chant going as the movie goes on. And is it true that you did not know what you were doing when you made that movie?
Well, a good part of the time we didn't.
Yeah.
And the movie was apt to get ahead of the writing. In fact, I used to stage scenes, and then Truman Capote and I would go down and write them. Yeah. So it was nip and tuck.
Which of you was Nip? And you wrote together with actors waiting or on the set, and you would come out with dialogue and hand it to them?
Yes.
It made a wonderful movie. Why did you never do that again? Not that your other movies weren't.
It was a bit harassing on the writers, yes, and on the nerves. Right? Yeah, quite.
How did Bogart and Capote get along? They seemed like
they got along famously.
Not people you'd expect to be roommates at school.
Truman has a way of endearing himself into any group. Mm-hmm. It's easy to fall victim to Truman's unintentional wiles. He's one of the most attractive and dearest men I know.
Yeah. And how did he and Bogart hit it off?
Oh, they got along famously until I remember one night. I forget what the occasion was, what it was about, but they began to wrestle, and quite surprisingly, Truman, who's a little bulldog, by the way, pinned Bogey's shoulders to the floor. Yeah.
With real pins or actually?
Oh, no. I'm using an old wrestling.
Yeah, that's. I have heard that, and I'm glad to hear that one confirmed.
Yes,
that makes a good story. Did Bogart ever live that down?
Well, he pretended it hadn't happened. So did the rest of us.
The best thing to do in a case like that. We will. Let's take just a little. But let me ask you this though: when Beat the Devil was first released, and when the studios got a look at it, did they say, "What is this supposed to be about"?
They certainly did, and so did the audiences and the critics and everybody else.
And when did they begin to realize that it was funny?
It took 3 or 4 years for it to begin to catch on, and then, as you said, it slowly grew into into a cult image.
Yeah. Somebody said about it that even if you come in at the beginning, you feel like you came in at the middle, and that no matter where you come in, you have the same feeling. But there's some of the funniest,
We have
most
that
wonderful
feeling making
scenes
it,
in
too.
It's not a way of making a film that you'd recommend, I suppose. It's some master touch.
Not a procedure to be advised.
Okay. Let's take a look at a short scene here that will probably make as much sense to you as any other scene we would have shown you from Beat the Devil. Is that ever shown on television, Beat the Devil?
I have no idea.
I sort of hate to think of Beat the Devil being on TV. You have to be in a theater, I think, to see it, and I hate to think of anyone not having seen it, but maybe it should make the rounds at least once a year. You know, I look at you as healthy as you are and as rugged a life as you've had and all the character lines in your face and all, and to think that you were once told that you were too frail to possibly continue existing is incredible. Could you tell about that? What age was that, and who decided you were too frail to...
Well, I was taken out to Arizona as a kid by my mother.
Yeah.
A number of things were supposed to be wrong with me. And I was put to bed and kept in bed. Finally it got to be an unbearable existence. I think this is what you want to hear about. This.
Yeah.
Something that Jim Agee wrote.
Yes, that's it. They said you were placed in a kind of hospital and kept there on the grounds.
Well, no, it was our house.
Ah.
And I'd sneak out at night. I'd be kept in bed. I remember the doctor telling me one time I was whistling, and said, "Mustn't whistle. It's an exertion that heart. You mustn't whistle." Whistling. That's how bad it all was. Yeah. Anyway, it was, as I said, unbearable. And I used to go out a window at night, and I'd seen them swimming in the Arizona Canal, which ran through Phoenix, part of Phoenix. And I'd go out at night when no one was there and go swimming. And they had locks in the canal, and and when they were irrigating, they'd open these locks and there'd be waterfalls. And one night swimming, I was swept over one of these waterfalls. And
the man who isn't supposed to whistle.
That's right. Yeah. And nothing. I was all right. I went underwater for a little while and then came out and discovered it was great sport. So I went up the bank and went over the waterfall again. And
were you amazed to be alive at the...
Well, I was, I had nothing to lose, God knows.
Yeah.
Anyway, finally there was a doctor that said I could walk a block and then walk around the block and find that I could go in swimming. And I went to this waterfall. I went down, swam. There were other people there, and I went over the waterfall. And then everybody began going over the waterfall.
And the doctor must have fainted when he saw
Oh, no.
He didn't know
the
about
doctor
that?
The doctor wasn't there. No. It was just that...
That's funny, because James Agee saw that. Well, he wrote a very moving piece about you and involved that. And he saw that as a kind of symbolic, some central incident in your life of conquering a kind of fear and deciding that you were not going to live a certain way, and that he saw the rest of your life as a great chance-taking. Is it when a thing like that is written about you? Is it hard to tell whether it's accurate or true or not?
Well, that one happens to be true.
Yeah. The incident, but I mean the perception about whether it's that it's a way of life.
Well, of course, I must say that Jim Agee was a very perceptive man. He's another one we miss, sadly.
He died much too early.
Much too early.
Yeah. I don't know if he's read much today. I guess his book of film criticism is still a standard among film buffs. Agee on Film.
Yes.
And he died of a heart attack at an early
That's right.
age, having written...
I was with him when he had his first heart attack.
Could you describe that, if it isn't too unpleasant?
Yes. We were staying at a resort in California, and I'd been in town and came back when I came back, why, Jennifer Jones and David Selznick were there, and they met me and said something awful has happened, and I went in and saw Jim, and the doctor was still there, and as soon as the doctor left, why, Jim said, would you give me a cigarette? And I said, of course not. It's the worst thing that can be done after a heart attack. And then, I forget whether it was that same night. I don't suppose it was, but a couple of days later, Jim said, for God's sake, give me a cigarette. I said, Jim, I can't do that. It's impossible. And when you get well, when you pull out of this, why, you've got to behave a little differently. Jim looked at me very straight and smiled. And I knew that he would never behave any differently.
How long after that was it that he had fatal?
A few years. 3 or 4 years.
He wrote the script for African Queen.
Yes, yes.
And among other things. Gee, we'll be right back. What happens when a beautiful shoe meets a beautiful foot? Let's see.